Hey everyone, welcome to episode 14. Today's guest is Camille Michelle Gray. This is the second episode with an astrologer. Even though what we talk about is more for the intermediate to advanced astrology student and teacher, I still feel like anyone out there new to astrology could learn a lot from this episode. If anything, there could be something in our conversation that you don't quite understand, but it sparks your curiosity. And one goal of this podcast is to do just that, spark curiosity. In the first half of the episode, Camille talks about what it's like being an Aquarius sun, her perspective on Uranus and Saturn, the rulers of Aquarius, carving out her own path, the power of reframes in astrology, her thoughts on the upcoming Uranus and Gemini transit, and more. During the second half, we dive into her work with Neptune and the Black Condition, where she is researching the connections between the planet Neptune and Black culture and history, particularly in/connected to the United States. I told myself while planning this podcast that I wanted to include astrologers, and I'm so happy that this is actually happening. First Umi Genevieve, and now Camille. In the interview, I tell Camille I forgot how I came across her work, but now I remember. Someone who I'm not going to name now because they're going to be on the podcast, and I like keeping the surprise element around guests, sent me Camille's writing on Neptune and the Black Condition, and I'll be forever grateful to this person for thinking of me. Besides this exquisite inquiry Camille has into the relationship between Neptune and Black existence, and again, just want to put this within the context of the US because there's Black people all over the world, I noticed a couple of things about Camille. She has such a creative way of communicating how zodiac signs express themselves. Her reframes have helped me break out of rigid thinking when it comes to understanding myself through an astrological lens. And although I didn't mention this to her, we have a shared interest in celebrity charts. Another reason why I wanted to interview Camille is because I'm genuinely curious about the Aquarian experience, whether a person is an Aquarius sun, moon, or rising, or has other placements in Aquarius. At some point, I tell Camille how I'm struggling to understand Saturn, one of the rulers of Aquarius, and she offers a reframe that I've been thinking about ever since. I ask her where she thinks her perspective comes from, because it feels so expansive, and what she shares just makes me think about all the folks out there who have placements that help both themselves and society perceive, think, be, embody differently. It wouldn't surprise me if a lot of influential people, especially on social media, showing us new ways to think, understand, and be, would have some sort of placement that helps people think in different, unconventional, more expansive ways. And what this means, especially when I acknowledge my own mental constructs, patterns, and sometimes stubbornness, is that there are options to mentally pivot. There are opportunities to morph my worldview, and there are other ways to be in the world. I guess the question is, am I truly open to exploring what it's like to think, feel, and act differently? Here is Camille's bio. Astrology makes clear that who we are is no accident, that we are connected to something bigger, that we are full of divine purpose on purpose. Over several years, Camille Michelle Gray has built a practice that celebrates that connection to the cosmos. She's here to remind you that you are a descendant of the great out there, to help you see it reflected in you. She hopes to provide affirmation of your humanity and to illuminate what your natal promise has promised you. Her consultations are steeped in the archetypal poetry of evolutionary astrology and are informed by the technical and traditional techniques of Hellenistic astrology. She completed the fundamentals of evolutionary astrology with Stephen Forrest and is a graduate of Chris Brennan's professional astrologer course. Camille loves learning, researching, and refining her craft. She is always perusing the catalog at Astrology University for workshops and courses. You may have heard of her before. She is a periodic researcher for and contributor to the Astrology podcast with Chris Brennan, and she's out here. Camille was awarded a scholarship to attend the Northwest Astrological Conference in 2020 and the International Society for Astrological Research Conference in 2022. She helped plan the inaugural Astro Bash 2023 conference in Borrego Springs, California, and spoke at the conference in 2024. Recently, she was chosen to present her research into Neptune and Black culture for the United Astrology Conference in September 2026. She writes a lot. She was a content writer for Stars Align, an astrology dating app, and she has contributed to the Huffington Post and Zora. Camille also currently muses aloud about all things astrology on her Instagram and Reddit, both at Millie Michelle. And this is linked on her Substack page in the show notes. Some reflections from this episode. The zodiac sign, Aquarius. Camille and I both have ancestral Aquarian energies in our natal charts, and I really enjoyed hearing what it's like being an Aquarius sun for her, her thoughts on belonging and how she is carving out her own path in life as someone with very different interests and callings. I have a lot of thoughts on Aquarian energies, expressions, but I need more time to flesh out my thoughts. I will say, though, that there could be an entire episode dedicated to delving into water in Aquarius, and maybe that will happen in the future. The power of reframes. At some point in the episode, Camille talks about how she has spent a lot of time helping her clients unlearn many of the things they have heard about their placements, which have skewed or warped how they view themselves and their lives. This really struck me. Even though I consider myself an astrologer, a baby astrologer, I know that I still have a lot of unlearning to do myself, especially around planets like Uranus and Saturn who rule Aquarius. I definitely recommend you check out Camille's website and her writing and take some time reading her reframes. For example, she reframes the sign Cancer and talks about how sensitivity is a strength. I'll link that post in the show notes. Overall, we agree that reframes can be life-giving and that we both prefer life-giving astrology. Neptune and the Black condition. So this will be a mix of what I've written here and just some free stream thoughts. Excuse me. You know what? I always feel like when I go over the intro, there's no issues. There's no sounds. My throat is clear. Like everything's okay. As soon as I press record, now there's all these things going on. The doorbell's ringing. Now my throat is dry. Like it's so annoying. But anyway, Camille's work with Neptune and the Black condition is really exciting, at least for me. And I know there are other folks out there who are deeply interested in the research she is doing. A few months ago, I bought a book called Written in the Waters, a memoir of history, home, and belonging by Tara Roberts. And Tara is a storyteller, adventurer, and traveler. That's how she describes herself on her website, who for the last 6 years has been following, diving with, and telling stories about Black scuba divers as they searched for and helped document slave shipwrecks around the world. Right now, I'm still in the middle of the book, and, it's got to be one of my favorite books of all time. Tara, I'm not sure if it's Tara or Tara, I should know. I say Tara, talks about how she first came across Black scuba divers searching for slave shipwrecks at the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. And if I remember this right, I think that, you know, this work caught her attention, but I think, and she talks about this in the book, she felt hesitant about sort of leaning into this history of slavery. I think it's because I think she was feeling, if I'm right, I mean, I'm reading the book, but sometimes I, feel afraid I'll not articulate something well or accurately. But I think she was just feeling like, Black people are always defined by the transatlantic slave trade, and it's I think she just didn't want her identity and being a Black person just to be confined to slavery. And I understand that. I think a lot of Black people feel that way. But what's interesting is that even though she was feeling hesitant, she leaned into um, this marine archaeology that these Black scuba divers were doing, and it took her around the world. Now, I'm not going to say any more because I recommend y'all get this book, read the book, listen to her podcast, which is called Into the Depths. And there's so many Black scuba divers out there, and I'm sure people of other backgrounds searching and finding slave shipwrecks around the world. And the first slave shipwreck I learned about was called the Clotilda. That's in the Mobile River in Alabama. Um, and I there's a movie about it called Descendant. I linked that in the show notes also. Um, I don't know, this marine archaeology and slave shipwrecks, it really moved me. I have a whole history with all of this that I could talk about, but I'll just say that, like, wow, uncovering the actual physical evidence and stories of the transatlantic slave trade is amazing. It's for so many reasons, because it, you know, helps people grieve and find closure, but it's like a testament to, like, wow, this happened, this happened. And I don't know, I'm really in this space of, like, Black people of different backgrounds. It's like we can acknowledge the transatlantic slave trade and also have a more expanded identity and stories about who we are and where we come from. I think for me, it's just that I noticed that, and I had a whole part that I took out because I was like, oh, I'm so tired. I want to say this clearly, but oh my gosh, my brain. And I don't know. I feel like sometimes if you're a Black person who's interested in, like, still processing slavery, I don't know, sometimes I see things out there where people are like, wow, you're still talking about slavery. You still got that, your whole identity is around the slave trade. And I don't know, I just feel like well, I wrote it down here. Well, I'll get to that part. So the other thing I wanted to say, that I wanted to connect to these whole storylines of finding slave shipwrecks is, what was going on land, because Mimi at the Through Line is all about all things water. But of course, when the slave ships got to their destinations, um, then what was happening, right? So the the ocean, the slave ships, it's not in a silo. There's all these sprawling connections. And I've been following the work of Stephen Satterfield, who just got back on Instagram. I've been following his work for a while, and he just got back on Instagram, and he's started posting about the role of cotton and the transatlantic slave trade. And he's actually calling Black folks, maybe he's calling people all kinds of people, but I'm sure black folks, to come pick cotton with him on Juneteenth to reclaim cotton. Now, of course, so many people are excited about this reclamation. I did see some, some comments where some people are like, "Nah, I'm good. I'm good." And I think that's totally fine. I think it's fine for people to, for black people to be like, "Yeah, I vibe with this, I vibe with that," or, "No, I don't. I'm okay." So with Stephen Satterfield doing this, it's like he was not only educating people about the role of cotton in the slave trade and the foundation of the United States' current wealth, he's also saying, like, let's rise into reclaiming this plant. Let's be the writers of this long story and change the narrative. And so I feel like I respond to this way of processing history where we can still acknowledge it at any time, explore it and move forward simultaneously, and so I feel like Camille is doing the same, where not only is she um well, Camille's work with Neptune and the Black Condition is there's a lot to it. I feel like I'm diving into talking about slave shipwrecks because one of the first things she mentions in a recent presentation she gave is the astrology of the first slave ship, and how this research was inspired by another astrologer named Vernon Robinson. So I think that's why I'm like jumping into slave ships, slave shipwrecks. But I forgot my thought. But yeah, I just feel like I just want to uplift her work, and it's such an interesting way to research and understand the slave trade and to understand and track Black experiences and Black culture and contribution and influence and all the things. And I think I'm just trying to make different connections, that here's this astrologer who's researching the role of Neptune in Black experiences. And then here is this person named Tara who's documenting the stories of Black scuba divers, like this organization called Diving with a Purpose. And then here is this uh, this Black man named Stephen Satterfield, who's you know, working on another part of the story where he's talking about this plant called cotton that generated so much wealth for this country. And, I'm just trying to make the connections. Um, so, oh my gosh, look, this is me releasing control because I so badly wanted to articulate this part in the most clear, most powerful way, but I've I've been tired recently, and I really wanted to publish this episode on Friday. Um, and maybe there will be another space episode where I can expand more on my thoughts, but just wanting to uplift Camille's work, that I hope people pay attention to what she's doing. I hope people support her work by booking a reading, sharing her posts on Instagram, sharing the presentation she gave for oh my gosh, and I have to she recently gave a presentation. I'm gonna go to my notes really quick. Oh my gosh, it's totally not planned. For the Organization for Professional Astrologers, which is free. You can view this on YouTube. It's linked in the show notes. And yeah, again, it might not be everybody's cup of tea. I don't want to feel like all Black people now have to resonate with this and now have to, I'm just saying, if you connect with what she's doing, please show some love, you know, by telling her, like, wow, I love what you're doing, by sharing this information, and yeah, I told Camille I'm so grateful for what she's doing, and I love astrology so much. I love what astrologers are sharing, and, like, it's really cool to see the perspective of different astrologers or people who are just into astrology, and I think that's so needed. Like, I think maybe we all do, like, I thrive off of, like, different perspectives. I don't know if it's my Gemini moon, but it's like it feeds me that you're thinking this way and you're thinking this way, and wow, I never thought of that before. I love it. So, that's all to say, um, thank you for sticking with me to the end of this intro. Thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoyed this episode. All right, listeners, if you can slash want to, please take your time listening to this episode. Make a cup of tea at home, find a cozy cafe, or listen on the go. Either way, I hope you find at least one thing in this episode that is interesting, sparks your curiosity, is helpful, or inspiring in some way. Until next time. Welcome to the podcast, Camille. I'm so excited to interview you today. You are the second astrologer on this podcast. I was serious when I said I was going to be talking to some astrologers. Um, and like always, I would love to know, how are you doing?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I'm happy to be here, by the way. I am doing well in this moment. I just take it moment by moment. But we were speaking before we hopped on about like a lot of speaking engagements, the Gemini of it all, just kind of having, a lot of nectars to sample. And how
I
that's
love that.
exciting, but also exhausting. So I'm in the middle of that kind of whirlwind, and I'm looking forward to it slowing down in about a week or two.
I hear you.
Yeah.
It's like that both of it's a whirlwind. Can't wait to go lay down.
Yes. And then when I lay down for too long, I'm like, I'm bored. And then I want the whirlwind again.
Yes, I know that. Well, I'm so glad you're here. And so glad for your astrology work. I find astrologers. I found you on Instagram. I don't know how, um, but I'm glad. The people who I follow, I learn from. And I noticed that on your Instagram, you share your big three. You're an Aquarius sun, a Taurus moon, and a Gemini rising. And I want to hone in on you being an Aquarius sun. Like,
Mhm.
what is it like being an Aquarius sun?
It's a casserole of experiences. I related very early on to the Aquarius feeling of like feeling alien, feeling a little bit in exile, like who are my people? Because one of the things I've learned about Aquarius and just learned about myself is like there is no box, right? It's about following your independent instincts, which necessarily won't look like what is offered in the world. So it takes a little bit of, trying to find yourself and honor your frequencies and accept that you're not going to belong everywhere or that you will stick out, maybe places somewhere too. But then the other side of Aquarius, I think, is once you're radiating at that frequency, whatever it is, your people come. The similar, wild spirits or the people who just let you do what you want to do. Maybe they have Aquarius placements, maybe not. But finding community has been really, really important in the last half of my life for just like solidifying who I am. Yeah, so both the good and the bad, but mostly I like being an Aquarius. I like being a little bit different and weird, as they say.
I love that. I feel like I needed to hear that. I know other folks needed to hear that because yeah, it's hard. It can be hard, like being yourself, moving to the beat of your own drum or carving
Yeah.
out your own path where there is nothing out there. maybe to show you the way or to affirm like it's okay to be you. So really it's like you you do have to affirm yourself and give yourself permission because that might not be out there.
That's
You know?
absolutely true. Validation of self is really important. And Leo is good at that, right? The sign that's ruled by the sun. Not to get too astrological, but Aquarius can feel a little bit, like left out, right? So to give themselves that sense of belonging first, and then to go into the world and see who matches that. Yeah.
I love that. I don't know, there's just something in me that's like, I know this is gonna be helpful for people to hear that, and also, like, not living in a box. Like, I
Mhm.
also read one time that, Aquariuses don't even understand what a box is. Like,
Yeah.
that like, have no idea what that means. It's like a different language,
Yeah.
and, um I just wonder, do you feel like you're in a place where I think you already said it, but do you feel like you're in a place where like you're comfortable being different? It's okay to be different. Or do you sometimes struggle with like wanting, I don't know, like
Yeah,
wanting to.
conformity is easy. You know what I mean? I will say it's easier to kind of be myself. Like I don't take it as personally anymore, but I'm not going to say it's still easy, especially with respect to career and what does it mean to be a Black astrologer who also works for the federal government, who's also a musician, like trying to hold space, and maybe that's also Gemini, hold space for all of those multitudes has been difficult because I don't know how to bring them all into fruition in a way that like has been done before, right? So that's where sometimes the lack of a template can be really paralyzing because you're like, well, I don't, I don't know what to do with this. So there are some moments where I'm like, it would be easier, right, to be normal or to do the normal thing. But mostly I honor it because I think it makes life incredibly interesting when you're th talking about like, what is a box? Everything that's the most interesting in life is right outside of that box, which is why I don't think Aquarius acknowledges it because it's boring.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yes, and I love how you're saying you are your own original template. And
That's
sometimes I
right.
feel like people are afraid to say that. I don't know where this came from. I feel like it's in the culture of like people like you want to tiptoe around saying you're unique, or maybe you want to use a different word, but like you're basically just saying that you're yourself. Like you have particular interests that you're figuring out how to hold and express.
Yeah.
Um and I don't know, I feel like I could just like sit right in this space of like, I don't know, just talking about Aquarius vibes, Aquarius
Yeah.
placements. Also, feel free to be as astrological
Okay,
as
cool.
you want.
I don't want to alienate your audience, but I'll try to make it
uh,
accessible.
yeah, well, I the first with the first astrologer, I got a chance to interview Umi Genevieve, and I said in the intro that it's more for like intermediate astrology nerds, students, teachers. So maybe it could be a mix of like for
Yeah.
beginners and
There we
more
go.
advanced folks.
All are welcome.
Yes. Um, okay. So do you know any other Aquarius suns or Aquarius placements who inspire you?
I have Aquarius placements in my family, so that's something that is weirdly enough kind of passed down, and family astrology is fascinating. I kind of see that as, when you add the layer of being a Black person in America, you kind of have to be a little bit exceptional or go outside the box in a way, because, the road for success really isn't created for people who look like us. So I attribute Aquarius in my ancestry, right, to that divergent thing that, just having to create your own narrative of success, which I think Aquarius is experimental enough to help with. But I remember, like when we only knew our sun signs, like when we were like 12 or 13, I remember like, oh, Oprah's an Aquarius, right? They would give you like, these are five other celebrities that are Aquarius. And I was like, oh, Oprah's one of them. So she's pretty important. She's pretty powerful, right? And she's a little bit divergent. She's an exception to the rule, which is very Aquarian as well. So she's the first one that comes to mind, honestly. It's like I can't help but always remember I'm in the same sun sign as as Oprah. Barack Obama has some Aquarius placements that I really admire. even celebrities like Julia Fox, like people who are out there, they're just being weird. I love that, and I see the Aquarius in them. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that because I think I got my Aquarius placements, Uranian energy passed down from my maternal line specifically, and I see that my brother is an Aquarius moon, and one of my sisters um, um, her sun conjuncts Uranus, and it's
Okay.
just it's just a lot of interesting Aquarian yeah, Aquarian placements.
Yeah.
And
Do you have an Aquarius placement?
well, I have a Saturn in Aquarius,
Yeah.
which I'm very grumbly about. I don't like it at all because
Why?
it's in my second house because it's it frustrates me so much because it's like, wow, I have to figure out how to like make money in this like different unconventional way because the way my mind works is like, wow, if I would have gotten a different placement, then I wouldn't have to be dealing with all of this like like dealing with myself.
That's right. When I first got into astrology, it was the same way, and it was similarly with my Venus and Aquarius placement. So maybe this segues into how I got into astrology, but I was like broken up with, right, and made to feel like really alien, right? Or like I was cold or distant or like something was wrong with me. And so that compelled me, actually, my mother was like, we should look at his natal chart and see what's wrong with him. We were like, but that compelled me to then be like, oh, I loathe this placement because it made me unlovable, or it makes it harder maybe to relate to others in love in the way that's conventionally portrayed. But then, it like took my world by storm, and I just started studying this craft, and I was like, no, I'm okay with this. And then I see other people out there in the world with their Venus and Aquarius. I'm like, they're rocking it. That was just one story of how it could look, and it doesn't have to like be that way generally. But yeah, I've been there before, and it's specifically with those Aquarius placements that you're like, can I just not?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm really it's been hard trying to create or understand the narratives around these placements
Yeah.
because I see myself making money in maybe non-traditional ways that my family are like, what are you doing? Why don't you just do this?
That's right.
And that's why I'm so interested in Aquarius Uranus energy because the world is set up a certain way. How do you live your life when there are social norms and structures and all these things in place that it's like, yeah, it can be hard, but
Very.
also you saying, so what you're saying is that you saw those other people with their Venus in Aquarius, and what it sounds like what you're saying is that like, seeing those examples are showing you that you can live your
Yeah.
life differently.
There's a several potentialities, right? One of those potentials is, yeah, lovers, right, may call me cold or aloof or whatever, right? That's one potential, but there's so many other ways that it shows up, even simultaneously. So it just got me to like break open the narrative. That's something that I've carried with me, like the Aquarius archetype of like alien, android, like robot, blah blah blah. And I used to, really love that because I was like, if I'm a robot, that means I'm kind of superior to humans. But as a human being, that's not helpful. But no, but yeah, it's just kind of like this walk into it doesn't have to be this way. So let me discover the gifts of this placement and how it works. And, funnily enough, like a year or so later, I met another person with Venus and Aquarius, and he's been my partner for 6 years. It works.
Wow. Wow. See, I just feel like this is what my soul yearns for, that when I start feeling trapped and like there's no way in astrology that actually there is.
Yes. Yes. You just have to like blow up the narrative, right? It doesn't have to look one sort of way. We're so dynamic as humans, so.
I love that. Shout out to Venus and Aquarius.
Yes.
Yeah. And so if you were telling someone completely new to astrology about Uranus and Saturn, the rulers of Aquarius, what would you say?
Yeah, so I guess I would give the historical context. So traditionally, Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius. then we discovered Uranus, and subsequently in modern astrology, it was given co-rulership of Aquarius. Um, I have a lot of interesting things to say about that. I do work mainly from a traditional framework where I just use Saturn as the ruler because it moves quicker. So it allows for more different kinds of Aquarius, right? Saturn in Cancer Aquarius or Saturn in Gemini Aquarius, whereas Uranus stays in a sign for 7 years. So that's a whole other thing. But I see it as both, Aquarius wants to break through and create new systems and wants things to be innovative and tolerant and kind of forward thinking. But the Saturn part comes in where it's like, I want to build actual reality on this. And Saturn is like, these are the structures, right? These are the boundaries that are needed. And so the utopian society, right, that Aquarius stereotypically wants to build needs to be based in structure. But I think Uranus is like that divine vision of like, this is how it could be, or let's do this, or let's do that. So I think they combine in such a way that Aquarius is both experimental, but is very interested in like finding conclusions to those experiments and then building from them. And, remembering it is a fixed air sign. So once Aquarius it wants to make up its mind, is what I'm saying. So it doesn't want to be in constant experimentation. It wants there to be an answer. So yeah, it's this like fluidity, but also rigidity that I think makes Aquarius incredibly interesting as an energy to study. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, I'm just taking that all in because the Saturn and Uranus, I say Uranus,
I see it.
they
Uranus, whatever. Yeah, it all works.
I I feel like I got a little beef with both of them because
Damn.
it's just because I'm still struggling to understand Saturn. I know that I have this one kind of perspective on Saturn as like of limitations and setbacks and roadblocks, and Uranus is just like this planet of surprise and shocks and every. I've literally tested out Uranus. I feel like in my experience I'll never, when it
Mhm.
comes to unexpected events, I'll never know what Uranus is going to hand out. I
That's
just
right.
feel like I've gone through different guesses, like I'll go through guesses, and each time it'll just be completely just
It's
some,
expect the unexpected, right? You can't put a
yes,
pulse on it. Yeah.
you can't. And I'm like, there must be some kind of intelligence to that. But this is all to say that I love how you've brought clarity to how they work together, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And just to
Um,
like reframe, like, so I know Saturn is, this is one of my like pet projects. I'm always trying to like reframe Saturn as a planet that's actually quite good. Um, but it's very true what you're saying that it is restriction and limitation. I call it like wherever Saturn is where we have a very uphill climb. But it's also the location of our like biggest masterpieces. Because if you can think about like, oh, this is a grueling process, I feel doubtful, I feel restricted, but I'm still going to push, push, push. Kind of like cliche, but pressure makes diamonds. And so Saturn ends up being the part of our chart that illuminates where we can create masterpieces in spite of all that pressure and resistance. So I always just like to reframe it as like, there's something good here. There's a huge promise here. It's annoying and it gets better as you get older. And then I also see Uranus, right, to just give a little bit more spaciousness there. It's like the great liberator in a lot of ways. And so it comes around, and I like to believe it doesn't destroy for the sake of destruction. It destroys for the sake of saying, you need to get free of this, please.
mhm, mhm,
And that, the onset of that feels destabilizing and it feels like unfair and like scary for real. But I think we look back and we're like, well, thank God that thing was taken away or this thing happened because it introduced me to a new level of authenticity that I don't think I would have had before. But I'm not going to even lie, like the process of going through Saturn and Uranus times is difficult.
mhm.
But I do think ultimately, and maybe I'm just an optimist, that it's for our character development, right?
Well, I absolutely love your reframes, and I actually have a question about that
Please.
later on. But gosh, yeah, those reframes are like a breath of fresh air. Like,
It
and
doesn't have to be so scary.
I know, and when I think of astrology, I like to think of it as educational, that it really is like receiving an astrological education, and that if people if this was incorporated in like mainstream higher education, people could learn right off the bat these reframes so that maybe their initial exposure to astrology is not like, you're doomed.
Exactly. And I sit across so many people in my client work where I'm spending so much time unprogramming what they've heard from other astrologers because they'll say stuff like, I'm doomed in love, or someone told me like I'll never be a mom. And there are roots of astrology, Vedic astrology, that's practiced in India, that's valid and true, and they do have a lot to do with like fatalistic, fate-determined answers that are like really, I'll just say flamboyant. So I don't want to like erase that history, but I do think in my practice, I try to be like, okay, let's be a little bit realistic.
Mhm.
You may or may not become a mom, but let's see like where the difficulty, where that difficulty is being spoken about in your chart, right? And let's like pull it apart and not be like yes or no, but instead, again, like a range of options. And some of them are more difficult than others. Like maybe you will have a harder time, for instance, becoming a mom, but I don't think it prohibits you from becoming a mom or from living a happy life as a momless person, right? So I'm always just trying to find ways in to be like, have you thought about it in this positive way?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That feels life affirming, or there's something about that in like feeding the life force, because if every day all day you're hearing about how it's not going to work
That's
and it's
right.
just a yes or no, then you come across someone who's like, okay, let's sit down, consider the options that we can see in the chart, just to open up, it's like opening up your airways so you can
Yeah, yeah, there
breathe.
it is. Yeah, yeah. I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but let's look at the options. Let's look at the forecasts, right?
Yes, exactly, because if I was a mom and I couldn't have children, I wanted children so badly, but if there is an option to adopt, or maybe I could, you, you know, um, work with children. I don't know. There's just something about seeing the options and what's possible. Um, so anyway, see, more life-giving astrologers. So I'm going to focus on, so this is how I phrased the question, but maybe I should change it now. I was going to focus on Uranus with this question, but if it makes more sense to include Saturn, please do. But now that
Okay.
you just shared, maybe
Yeah.
you'll include both. So being Uranus ruled, with Uranus being the newer ruler. Have
Hmm.
you experienced a lot of surprising, unexpected, shocking events throughout your life? And if so, can you share a story of a time you experienced something completely unexpected?
So my answer to that question as a subjective person who's viewing my life, I don't think I've had huge major upheavals. I had a pretty solid childhood, lived in the same place. Even as an adult, I've had the same job for a very long time. That's trying to be taken away because it's in the government, but that's another story. So I've always practiced and have been blessed to have consistency be there for me. But I think where Uranus plays in, and this is more maybe getting into my natal chart, Uranus and Saturn are in a place that's a little bit more hidden, more about psychotherapeutic work, occult work, spiritual work. Most of my like sudden things have been those internal shifts, to be honest. Even like waking up to astrology was like a Uranus. I have it in my eighth house. It was a Uranus eighth house kind of like revelation to like, oh, there's like an entire different way to look at the human experience. Or, I'm a very therapized person, so like getting shocking insights through like continuous work in therapy. But even like sudden things, it is the planet of like suddenness, but I always like to hold space for like sometimes Uranus can be happy surprises. I've
Mhm.
had experienced those kind of random plot changes or even what I would call serendipity. That to me felt like Uranus being like, bam, surprised, work with that. And it's been life affirming. And I love that phrase because I use that phrase too in my work instead of saying positive or negative. But that was a life affirming um, Uranus kind of like manifestation for me. Yeah, so I think I've been spared from like yet the cataclysmic, more material shocks in your outside world. And I've been subject to profound internal shocks just by my own willingness to kind of travel within. So yeah, I hope that gives people like a new way to look at Uranus. Like I am
Wow.
Uranus ruled, my ascendant ruler is conjunct Uranus. So
Wow.
Uranus is pulling a lot of sway, and so is Saturn, but I've mostly been spared.
Wow. Ah,
Yeah.
I needed to hear that.
Good.
Talking to you is really illuminating my mindset
Okay, good.
because it's just showing me that maybe I could spend a little bit more time kind of sitting with, having a more optimistic outlook or kind of imagining a more benevolent universe because
That's
I
right.
I feel like I'm, maybe it's because I've been watching a lot of terrible news, but it's
Yeah.
so great. I have such I need this sort of I want to hear these other experiences about Uranus.
Good.
Like it's
Yeah.
not just like this shocking
Yeah. And
event.
also, like, let's turn down the temperature of how it has to look. Like, in traditional astrology, they would say the most catastrophic thing to paint a picture, right? Uranus is sudden downfalls and diseases. But in modern human context and in day-to-day life, Uranus is sometimes also like, oh, I got a job that I didn't apply for. Okay. Or like, oh, I didn't foresee this person reaching out to me, right? It's the small, like, kind of shock waves, right? That can be both life-changing, but also just in the day-to-day, like the magic of day-to-day things. Yeah, so Uranus doesn't have to be these big, like, tower moments. Uranus can also just be like, I didn't foresee that coming. And that could be good, bad, big or small, or neutral. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So in that way, I've seen Uranus working in my life a lot because I look back and I'm like, that's so random. If you look back and you're like, that's so random, that's probably a Uranus transit.
Wow. I don't know if you have any Sagittarius placements, but it just seems like, oh no.
I
It's
don't.
I wonder, do you know where it comes from? Because from my side, it feels like you really give an expanded view of astrology. Like there's some sort of um you're really opening up astrology to
I'm
be
glad.
sensed differently. Do you know where that comes from? Is it in your
In my
chart or in
chart?
yourself?
Yeah, I have Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, in my third house of communication and teaching. Yeah, so these like very expanded, like spacious ways of looking at things instead of feeling so like hungered down. And by the way, I only got here because I was the victim of all those things. I was like, oh, I have moon opposite Pluto. I'm gonna die or be the victim of I went there. I was in those spirals.
Yes.
But then when I kept seeing that it didn't map onto my life and that astrology sometimes is not exceptional, it's just the random things that are happening in your mundane reality, I think that gave me a new way to like hold it. I was like, no, it's these normal random things or routine things that happen in our lives, and it doesn't have to be like a major life-shaking event. So yeah, and I also like to say to people, maybe when Mercury goes retrograde or there's eclipses or like a big transit, I'm like, you've done it before. You've done this before.
Yes.
You've lived through a lot of these kind of patterns before. Maybe not Neptune and like, big transits because those are once in a lifetime, but you've done it before. So don't let it scare you.
Yes.
You've
That's
lived
such
your
a
life
great
already.
reminder.
Yeah, yeah.
That's such a great reminder. Hey, shout out to that Jupiter in the third house.
Hey, that's my friend.
Oh my gosh. So speaking of which, Uranus is entering Gemini in July. I forgot, like July 9th or something. Do you have any
Seventh.
Oh,
Yeah.
the 7th. Do you have any thoughts on this transit?
Yeah, I do. I guess the first way in is just looking at it from a global context or what's happening in America. We were going through similar transits that we did during the Civil War, similar transits during like many revolutions that we went through, the American Revolution, but also the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution were all happening with Pluto and Aquarius, where it is now. But Uranus and Gemini, so I think that we're seeing obviously a buildup or a representation of like we're becoming increasingly more divided. So I see it as maybe kind of like splintering off into factions and like, oh, we got to fight the power. Um, but on a more personal level, I've been kind of working with Uranus and Gemini as like pardon the interruption. There's been like a story playing out in your Gemini house, and Uranus is going to come around and give you 7 years worth of plot twists. Which again can be exciting, but in Gemini, very dizzying because it's already a very mutable sign. And Uranus is like, I love mutability because I love change. And so it could be very destabilizing. I've been looking at it from like as an anxious person, I'm like, I better ground down now and get my nervous
Mhm.
system together
Mhm.
because it could just be so much of a mental overwhelm. Social media will change. We'll probably see so many more AI tech inventions because it's an air sign, so it thinks. Yeah, so I think we're in for a roller coaster ride. And my main advice, which is people need to touch grass during this entire 7 years because it can really make you fly away and lose touch.
Yes, I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to be touching grass
Please.
and, taking care of my nervous system. Yeah, I'm curious to see what happens with Uranus and Gemini. Um, Sorry, I
No
heard some
worries.
noise in the background. Um, yeah, I'm sure it's gonna be a
Wild ride.
a wild ride. Yes, that's it. And I think you hit it on the nail. Touch some grass, hug a tree, do something, and yeah, get a massage or something.
There's gonna be a
Um,
lot of downloads too. If you're like a spiritual psychic person, we're talking about just constant mental stimulation. So yeah, a massage, anything that helps you get back into your body is so helpful during this time. Yeah.
Wow. Ooh, I can't wait. Well, I think part of me is like, I can't wait. The other, another part of me, because this is a question, I took it out. Um, I took it out. Maybe I can slip it in just a little bit and then we can go
Mhm.
to the reframes. It just seems like, yeah, there's some huge shifts going on. And, Pluto entered Aquarius last fall, and if I'm correct, we saw all of these big federal changes happen. It was either at the beginning of Aquarius season or during Aquarius season. And so this is what I mean with Aquarius is that with Aquarius, it is like systems are changing. Everything that's been established is changing. And
Yeah.
let me see if I can remember this question because I took it out. But um I was watching your Instagram stories, seeing you share about your own personal experiences with these changes and moving through them. And I was just curious how it is for you moving through these changes. Because it's
Yeah.
not only um it was Aquarius season, it wasn't even like this big outer planet shifting into another, well, besides Pluto and Aquarius, but it's
Yeah.
like there's so much going on. Like, how are you moving through this? You're an astrologer. You have this
Mhm.
sense of what's going on the astrological level. How are you moving through these things?
Well, yeah, so that is correct. Like during Aquarius season was the inauguration, right? When we had the changing of hands of power and this whole, again, move fast and break things. With our government started. And that just made me think, and then I'll get into my own experiences, like remembering that Aquarius wants to build a utopian ideal, but whose utopian ideal? And so these people in power, right, they have their own idea of what the ideal looks like. And Aquarius is that too. Aquarius is Ronald Reagan. Aquarius is like Kim Jong-un, these dictator type people who have this crystal clear idea of how they want society to be, and they're going to get there by any means necessary. Aquarius as the outlaw and the rebel as well. So we're seeing that side of Aquarius, which is unfortunate. But for me personally, astrology has armed me with the knowledge to like see these things coming. So Pluto was on top of my sun, which is a once in a lifetime. Not everyone will even get this transit, like really profound death rebirth with your ego, right? Like everything you've known yourself to be starts to fall away. And I've been seeing that happen, girl, because I worked for the federal government for 15 years and I'm facing now the prospect of that going away. And it's like, who will I be if I don't get up to go to work every day at 9 a.m.? That's who I've known myself to be. I've known myself to be like astrology part-time. What does it mean if I do it full-time? I don't know who that person is. You know what I mean? So it's hard to grapple with these changes, but because I am an astrologer, I'm aware of what the highest potential is. And so I find that I'm personally a little bit more surrendered around it because I know that this is the time for these things to be happening. So that's how I deal with it in a personal way. when we're talking about like what Pluto is doing in this more societal and specifically American way, I am worried, but I also know that I can only play my part. And so being empowered then to take astrology as far as it can go, especially as a medium for advocacy. And I hate people who try to divorce astrology from politics because astrology is politics. Astrology is everything that's happening. So anyway, using astrology as a storytelling tool to talk about what's happening and like why and what the potentials may be and like what where we go from here. So yeah, it's just maybe this is also Aquarius. It's giving me like a helpful detachment because from
Hmm.
an intellectual point of view, I could see what's playing out and it all makes sense. It all makes sense.
Yeah, it's wild how much sense it all makes. Um,
Yeah, right? Yeah, like
yeah.
empires are falling. That is so Pluto into Aquarius. It's very literal. All that proliferation of AI that we saw in the summer of 2023 and into 2024 was Pluto into Aquarius. So literal. And now we have like literally like three oligarchs in charge, tech bros, right? The underbelly of Pluto and Aquarius. And we're seeing that really loud as well. It's so like astrology is like not subtle.
It's not
Sometimes
subtle at all.
Sometimes it's like, hey, this is it. And we're in one of those moments.
Wow. Yeah, and I just feel like I don't know if I'm gonna articulate this well or if I'm gonna remember it right. Because this is another question. We're gonna get to these questions, but I noticed
Yeah.
that you read a lot of celebrity charts, and I looked
Yes.
at Trump's chart, and he's a Gemini sun, and I think his sun is in the 11th house. And I think a lot about like iconic people, and I
Hmm.
also noticed that Marilyn Monroe. I started watching this documentary again yesterday. She wasn't a Gemini sun, and I think her. I'm not sure if this is correct. I think her Gemini sun was in the 11th house, or she had some 11th house placement. So it's like
Yeah.
you can already see with Trump that there's something about. I'm just trying to track like people who are iconic to other people. And it seems like when you have 11th house placements, that garners like massive
Yeah.
attention and followers.
Yeah, the 11th house is like audiences, and the audience can ostensibly be the entire world. So these huge megastars often do have like powerful 11th house activations. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm just, you know, I, it a lot of this stuff sends you down rabbit holes. I don't know if you go down rabbit holes and it
I
makes you
love a
ask,
rabbit hole. I got Mercury in the eighth house. That's where all of
oh,
my like astrology research has just come from a rabbit hole that I've walked down.
I love it. Look, Mercury in the eighth house. You're the first Mercury in the eighth house. What? I love a good rabbit hole. I can hear the
Yes.
sounds. It's like roll, roll.
Yeah, I feel myself getting deeper.
I love that. I love that you're naming that astrology and politics are related. It's once you realize that there's just like no way that you can separate them because it's just
Yeah.
there's just no way to separate. Um so kind of pivoting back to reframes, Kiki Palmer says she is the queen of a reframe, and I've thought
Okay,
about that a
period.
lot. Yes, period. Um, I noticed that you share a lot of reframes about astrology, meaning you help people perceive and understand a sign, a house, or an aspect differently. Are there one or two reframes that have really shifted your understanding of your chart or astrology
Mm.
itself?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that I felt like I was reading Kiki Palmer's part of her memoir, and I think I did hear her pulling up that word reframe a lot. She has a Sagittarius moon, right? So exploding on like, so that Sagittarius connection is you're picking up on that. They want to like add more space. Um, so the first reframe um, that I wrote about, one of the first things I wrote about, like one of my first long form essays was reframing Aquarius, actually. And the title was Reframing Aquarius, How the Detached Teach Us About Love. And so this was kind of my revenge post, Simone, because remember, I felt like I was broken up with because of my Venus in Aquarius. So it sent me down this whole thing about like, there's a resonance between Valentine's Day being an Aquarius season. And if astrology is always working, there's a reason for that. there's a reason why Valentine's Day is in the middle of Aquarius season. So I went down the history of like Saint Valentine, and like he got thrown into jail for like marrying couples that wanted to be married, giving people the freedom, right, to choose if they wanted to be married during a time where like that was severely limited, marrying people in prison, marrying blind, just like he was doing an Aquarius thing there. And so the entire piece was like the acceptance and the freedom and the tolerance that Aquarius gives you is actually the best form of love because it allows you to be exactly who you are. And there is a kind of intoxication with what I think is codependent love because we see that in the movies or we see that talked about in music, and it's very romantic and compelling. But I think the best love is the love that allows you as the individual to grow and to be yourself and to go away and to come back. So there's a no strings attached kind of love to Aquarius that I think is supreme. And
Mm.
every Valentine's Day, you're like, why is this Aquarius season? It is Aquarius season. And I repost that almost yearly. I'm like, let me tell you why it's an Aquarius season. So I go into more depth into that, but that's the first pivotal reframing that I needed to do to help me love myself and to accept myself. So that's a big one. And another reframing I do reframing of the signs because I hate sign stereotypes. But I did another reframing of Cancer because like I was tired of seeing like Cancer the crybaby. I don't even have Cancer placements really, but I was like, I'm tired of seeing that out there. And so I wrote about how, sensitivity is the biggest strength, like to come into this world, which is so painful and chaotic, and then to have to feel it is powerful. So there's nothing weak about Cancer. In fact, they're the strongest among us because they are constantly processing, all water
Mm.
signs maybe, but constantly processing the horrors and showing
Yes.
us how then to process it too. And I get into a lot of like mythology, bringing in like history to like help me prove my points there. So a lot about like Roman and Greek mythology, even African mythology with ocean and like those kind of gods and goddesses too. So yeah, those are like the main things that I love doing. I love reframing an entire sign because then any planet or any aspect is operating under that reframe too, if that makes sense.
Ah, I love that. I feel like I'm getting all emotional. I don't even know
Oh,
why. I'm like, "Is my period coming?" No, I mean, I getting emotional because sometimes I feel trapped and maybe other people feel trapped, and it's nice to know, like, these reframes, and also I had no idea about I didn't even think about Valentine's Day being an Aquarius season,
yeah.
and, I have been thinking a lot about love and reading about love from different folks, and, um that makes so much sense to me, that kind of love, that you just described.
Yeah.
So, I love that we all received some a love teaching, just
Mm.
you just sharing right now.
Yeah.
This is why I was passionate in asking you about Aquarius energy
Yes.
because I'm like, wait, we need to stop. Everything needs to stop. We need to like stop and you know, look at Aquarius and deepen into Aquarius. I know that there's the relationships in the chart, but wanting to like give Aquarius some love, you
Yeah.
know.
Or in Aquarius times with Pluto there. I mean, like Aquarius is really underscoring a lot of what's happening. So we should get into Aquarius.
Yes. And show some love.
Yeah.
Um Before we dive into your incredible writing and presentation on Neptune and the Black condition. I want to
Mm.
ask a fun, playful question.
Okay.
Like I said, I know you share your perspective on celebrity charts like Beyonce, Meghan Markle, Martha Stewart, Rihanna, and more. Are there any celebrity charts, whether folks are alive or passed away, that really fascinate you?
Ooh, that's a good one. The first one that comes to mind is actually Josephine Baker. She didn't have an Aquarius placement, but she has a lot of Gemini, which I know you and I share as well, which is also kind of a very maligned sign when you think about it. It's like always Gemini and Scorpio that are spoken about. So I need to do some reframings of those.
Yeah.
But she had this beautiful effervescent Gemini stellium in her 10th house, and she was so playful and claimed her joy and claimed her intelligence during this time where it was very hard for Black women to do so. And she was so multifaceted. She was like a spy, if people didn't know, and she was worked for like the French Revolution, and she was also a singer and a dancer, and she adopted all these children. She's just so fascinating, and her chart really just spoke to that to me. Like, and her Gemini is just the highest potential of Gemini to me, because it's like she really was a jack of all trades and was good and powerful and useful in all of those trades. You know what I mean? And then speaking of 11th house placement, she had like Neptune conjunct Venus in Cancer in the 11th. And that's just a placement of like people adore you. You got Venus in the 11th house, people adore you or
Wow.
idealize you, especially. So that was a chart that came to mind. I wouldn't have thought to say that, but I accepted that that's what came through.
I love that.
Yeah.
I actually just saw a video on Instagram of Josephine Baker, and it was in color.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so I was like, wow, I never saw her like in color before.
Yeah.
And now I want to go learn more about her.
Yeah.
Um,
Bilingual. She was an actress. She was all doing all
wow.
kinds of things. Yeah.
See, and that speaks to freedom to me, just embodying
Yes.
your interests and what you want to do, and then being able to get around and make money.
There you go. Yeah.
Um, wow. Thank you for sharing that. I could be here again also asking about more celebrities. But let's get to Neptune and the Black condition.
Yay.
Um, so I wanted to say, I don't know if you've heard this before, but I truly think this is groundbreaking work. And I know that this was inspired by another astrologer, um, Vernon,
Yes, Vernon Robinson.
Vernon Robinson. So between you and Vernon Robinson, this is to me, this is groundbreaking work because,
Oh,
you know, I just felt like when I came across your writing, I understood myself but better, I understood my life better. Everything started making more sense. And this is why I think knowledge is power, you know?
yes. Yeah.
Um, so I really encourage people to, I'm going to link your presentation that you recently gave
Yeah.
in the show notes. And to start out, for folks who don't know about your work, Neptune and the Black Condition, which you recently presented on during Mercury Hour with the Organization for Professional Astrology, can you
Mhm.
share what it is that you're researching?
Yeah. So essentially, my research goes into the fact that I think Neptune is the significator of Black people and Black culture of the diaspora, but I'm focusing on Black American experience just because that is my wheelhouse. So Vernon Robinson at a conference in 2023 gave a talk about the astrology of the first American slave ship, which is important and that exists on his site somewhere. And I just always have to shout him out because in that presentation, he made a kind of aside, kind of saying like Black people are Neptunian. I kind of like asked him about it, right? And he was just, it made sense, but it I knew that there was a deeper connection, and so I wanted to like pull up specific examples or get really into the nitty-gritty of why this works. And so that's what I ended up doing over the last I guess after that conference in 6 months, I pulled together a zine, a digital magazine. But then I took that down and then created an entire talk, which is what you witnessed with the Oprah presentation. So yeah, it just goes into Neptune significations, how they map onto the Black experience. So for instance, Neptune is the planet of slavery and marginalization, but it's also the planet of incredible rhythm, imagination, culture, beauty, aesthetic. I think we are the blueprint when it comes to culture, period, across the world. And so Neptune has a lot to do with that as well, that which spreads, that which becomes the ideal. But Neptune is also theft, it's proliferation, it's, Black people don't do country. That's silly. So the watering down of like the roots and everything. So yeah, it shows its faces in so many horrific but also incredibly beautiful ways. And I'm just really excited to continue exploring it.
That is amazing. I was watching the presentation early this morning to prepare for the interview. And I was just like, I have no idea where to start with asking you questions about this because there's so many angles.
Yeah,
Um, so many angles, and you could go deep with one part or this part. So I finally decided that I'm just going to start at the beginning of your
yeah.
presentation. Um, you talk about how illusions and well, wait,
Mhm.
let me backtrack. So you first begin your talk with Neptune and the African diaspora, and you touched on it a little bit, but I wonder if you can expand more. Um, why did you do that? Or, another way to ask this question is, why are you connecting Neptune to Africa and the diaspora? Like,
Yeah.
why
Well,
not
so I
another planet?
Oh, very true, very true. Well, so I thought it would be helpful to start right at the beginning. And so when I was thinking, like obviously slavery existed in Europe before it was, transposed over to the Americas, but that's where our condition started. It started with the theft of African folks across the transatlantic slave trade to land then, right, in like Brazil and the Americas and all that. So that felt like an appropriate place to start. And honestly, a lot of this research was free associative. So I love like linguistics. So I looked up like what is the meaning of diaspora, and it was like spreading or migration. And I was like, that's what Neptune does, because Neptune is the planet of the ocean, right? So the Roman god of the seas was Poseidon, and so that's Neptune. He holds like the Neptune trident. And so Neptune is the ruler of the ocean. I was like, oh, so like literally our conditions started out on the ocean. Many people lost their lives to the ocean. When you think about the ocean with respect to water, water is something that dilutes. It makes things unclear, right? So the question of like, where are you from? I don't know. I guess I'm from Washington, D.C., but I don't have the privilege of really knowing like where in Africa or even where in Asia and Europe I'm from because of that watering down and because of that migration. So that is where I felt um, it was fit to start. And the reason why Neptune represents the Black experience, because I've also heard like Saturn, maybe, because when you think of Saturn also as like the margins or people who are locked out or people for whom there are incredible boundaries to entry, that makes sense, but it didn't really cover like our magic. It didn't cover our talent. It didn't cover our culture. Saturn really has nothing to do with that, for real. And I also go into the talk like at the very end, like Saturn is structure, and I don't think Black people have been afforded really any kind of structure here. What we've created has been from nothing, which is a Neptunian experience, right? So yeah, that's where I felt, the right place to start was like, let's just start on the open water, because that's how we got here, basically.
Yes. Now, see, I there's this other question that I wasn't sure I wanted to ask, but and I don't know if I should ask it right now. But it just, I think maybe this is a good time. It might jump over some things.
Mm.
But in my own astrology research, I was actually really surprised to come across, like a racialized group connected to a planet, because I learned Black people were connected to Saturn like 2 years or so ago.
Mhm.
And I said, oh, okay. Then I came across your work. You're the second person who's connecting Black people to a planet, Neptune, and that made more sense to me. So I was like, oh, whoa, there's something to this. There was so much clarity and intrigue that came from your writing.
Mm.
So then I started contemplating Black people in different planets. And then honestly, I was like, okay, and I wasn't sure if this was the wrong thing to think, but I was like, does this mean, like white people or people with resources and power and opportunities are connected to Jupiter? And because I just feel like opportunities really dictate life and they make up life. Like one person's here because they had an opportunity, one person's there because they had an opportunity. So then you go down the rabbit hole. What
Mhm.
opportunities exist? Who's given opportunities? Who's receiving opportunities? And I know that Jupiter is connected to divine justice, and it makes me think of Jupiter and equity, that like
Mhm.
actually Jupiter seems to be connected to Black people also. And I know that Jupiter and Neptune both rule Pisces. And so I'm just curious about your thoughts on even Jupiter in this whole conversation of Neptune and the Black condition. Because um, in my mind, I'm just like, this whole, the Black people in Neptune, built the Jupiterian wealth of the US.
Yeah,
And that,
ain't that
where's our Jupiter at?
for real, right? Who knows? But you're so right. So there is a kind of overlap between Jupiter and Neptune, and the difference that I make between them is Jupiter is a planet of scholarly and academic endeavor. It's very much connected to the brain. It's connected to a brain that's thinking about higher concepts, right? About like God and divine laws. But it is, to me, in this context, a mental function. It is dogma. It is the proselytizing of perspective. But to me, Neptune is just experience with the divine. I don't need to go through the gatekeeper of religion. I don't need to go through the gatekeeper of a preacher. It's just there. And that was present just in like traditional African, religious culture. It was just like, I'm one with nature, or we do like divinatory work. There wasn't like everyone had a piece of that like divinatory pie. It wasn't just like the chief or like the way that it is kind of now. So that's how I would explain the difference. I feel like Jupiter is so much about perspective. It's about a mental construct where Neptune is just experience. And I think you can maybe feel the difference. Like listen to a blues track, go watch Sinners, like be immersed in the music and the culture and the land. That is a Neptunian experience because you don't have to think about it. It's in the soul, it's in the body, it overtakes you. So I attribute Neptune to a far more powerful experience of the divine. And so that's why I feel like Black people are more so under that guise. And you're also right, like Jupiter is king of kings. He is Zeus. He is the giver of fire and thunder and resource. And we don't have that. Neptune doesn't give resources. Neptune degrades resources. And I was speaking to a lovely astrologer, Laura Chung, and she says, the marginalized folks and Black folks are so rich in culture. We're rich in Neptune, but we're not rich in structural things like Saturn or, even access to higher educations or the higher echelons of society like Jupiter. So that's, I guess, where I would draw the difference. Neptune's a little bit more slippery in that way, but it's still far more profound, I think, of an experience.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your perspective on that because, um, you know, I think sometimes, and you talk about this in your presentation, how there's that power with Neptune, but it's also devalued in a strange way. It's uplifted and devalued at the same
Mm.
time. Um, but I know that we could sit there too and you know go into that. I think there's so much there. You also talk about how illusions and or delusions are associated with Neptune, and you connect this to Frederick Douglass saying that these illusions, distortions, and lies upheld and protected slaveholding Christianity and the slave trade. So, how do you feel Neptunian lies, illusions, distortions, and denial, because you also
Mm.
connect Neptune to denial, are
Mhm.
operating today, especially in relation to Black people in the US?
Well, to start first on the denial coin, I mean, like the whole Black Lives Matter was a rallying cry to say, like, this is still happening, period. Like, look at this. There's a disproportionate relationship between law enforcement and the Black community, which then echoes so many other disproportionate relationships we have to American life. Um, so the denial is strong because waking up requires looking at some really gnarly shit. And I guess if you're a white person who doesn't want to be on that path, that's maybe too painful to accept that your ancestors had a play in this and that you're benefiting from it. So I feel like Neptune is like the anesthetic, it's the numbing, it's the like, nah, love and light, color blindness, like, reverse racism, or like the silly things that people invoke not to have to look at the real truth. Um, what was the other question? That's how the
Well,
illusion, I mean, the denial.
Well,
Yeah,
I think you hit it right on the nail. I was
yeah.
just saying, how do you feel like the Neptunian lies, illusions, distortions are operating today?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think you hit on a really great point that I think it can be people can feel comfortable in that sort of blurry. Um, and then you got the did it really happen?
Oof.
The all of the
Erasing. Yeah.
yeah, and it just gets really blurry and like it can get really comfortable in that space and you don't have to address anything. You don't
There
have to
you
look at
go.
anything.
Yeah, it's very passive planet. Very passive. Does not have a whole lot of agency at all, except through music and culture and film, which is the language it speaks. Yeah.
And that's what's so interesting is that That's acknowledged and appreciated and celebrated, but, the more kind of uglier parts seem to fall by the wayside, or you only go a certain distance with those,
Or
you
it's
know?
just like, yeah, we want your culture, but we don't care about you as a people. Just extract that greatness for us, and we don't care about your human experience. So it's also
Yeah.
just like that complete denial of like what has informed this work to begin with. Like, why do you think blues music is so affecting?
Yeah.
Because we were tortured, we were dehumanized on a daily basis. And so, of course, that's going to be in the music. You know what I mean? But they just want to take the music and not take the context.
Mhm.
Same with hip hop.
Yeah, and I think, you just gotta say it over and over again, and you just keep saying it until
Yeah.
you know, now, this is another question I had for you from your astrological perspective. In the same vein as lies, illusions, delusions, distortions, you also say that Neptune doesn't cite its sources. So, within the context of Neptune and the Black condition, you're basically saying, people take from Black folks in direct and casual ways without citing their sources. And
That's
you
right.
give music as an example. And I'm curious if you believe in octaves. Like, the lower octave of Neptune is to like take an idea from a Black artist Instagram account and don't mention them. And but the higher octave is like you name the Black artist and you give them their flowers. Like, do you believe in octaves?
Yes, I believe, and that's a term you said. I believe there's life affirming and then there's life depleting ways that planets show up. So the life depleting will be copying or like assimilating Black culture into the main culture, but locking them out as like participants in that. It's definitely also this kind of feeling of God, where was I going with that? It was on the tip of my tongue. This is Gemini processing in progress.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
Hey,
but the higher and the lower of it all, right? So there's life affirming, which is like we're gonna center you, which is kind of maybe what the Met Gala did, right? Making it about our contributions to fashion and to culture. Yeah, so there's definitely, and then all the in-betweeny ways, right, that it shows up. And I love how you said like casual and direct, because sometimes it is quite casual, like people saying period or cis, like that's not yours.
Mhm.
But it's just leaked. And that's what Neptune is. It's like a slow leak, something you don't notice until it's completely overwhelming. And then it becomes like, well, who did do this first? And then that becomes its own thing, right? So I totally believe that because we see it in humanity that these planets show up in diabolical ways, but also in profoundly healing and affecting ways too. Yeah.
Wow. I it's yeah, it's eye-opening what you're sharing, and I love that you're still including, I know that we're talking about Neptune in this way, but also that Neptune is can be also healing,
Hmm.
because I always feel like I want to acknowledge that the planets are multidimensional. There's just different facets of them.
Yeah,
Uh,
just like the different facets of us, right? It's kind of as above, so below, as below, so above. Like we're not one way, so the planets don't show up one way at all.
yes, and it's just so important to remember, especially if
Yeah.
you get like stuck on one face.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
you have tracked significant events in Black history connected to Neptune, including when the transatlantic slave trade started, the Nat Turner slave rebellion in 1831, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech in 1963, Barack Obama's inauguration in 2009, the first taping of the Oprah Winfrey Show, Neptune's role in hip hop. Like the fact that you track this, and so what do you make of all this?
Yeah. So if the assumption is, well, if Neptune signifies Black culture, then the movements and the position of Neptune in the sky during these pivotal events could say something about like the culture or like a twist or a pivot in the culture. And all of the things you've named, as small from the Oprah Winfrey Show to as big as the Nat Turner slave rebellion, were in their ways kind of like a changing of the paradigm. Like what did Oprah do for like Black people in media, but also what did Nat Turner do to instill fear in slaveholding Americans, right? To know that it was wrong. So yeah, in those charts, and astrologers may quibble about this, but like when Neptune is on an angle, it's powerful. It's like saying something about the material reality of that event. And so It was in the first house during the I Have a Dream speech. It was in the fourth house. These are all angular houses during Oprah's first taping. It was in the seventh house during the Nat Turner slave rebellion. And it was in the 10th house during Barack Obama's inauguration. So kind of just like tracking it through those angles. All of those events are different in their intensity and their impact, but Neptune was saying something quite profound about them. Yeah.
Wow. How do you think we as Black people, this might be obvious, but how can we as Black people understand ourselves better through Neptune?
Yeah, I think definitely first to understand what Neptune is and even the history of Neptune. Its founding was very dubious. Was it founded in 16 whatever or in 18, 48 or whenever the modern iteration was? So I think like anchoring in the story and the mythos of Neptune is one of the ways to then just be like, have I had these experiences where I've had to like be one person in this world and then another person in this world? Or have I had this experience where I'm pretty sure I took ownership of this, but I saw it copied? And then I'm like doubting or I'm being gaslit by society. I think then you can maybe start seeing a little bit more of Neptune, not only in your life, but in the lives of your ancestors, right? In your community writ large. And then I also think it's helpful to track transits of Neptune. So right now, Neptune made a very important transit that it has never made for anyone alive on the planet. It just entered Aries. And so again, like, what has that meant about Black culture in the last few months? Well, we've seen Sinners be this runaway success. We've seen Cowboy Carter and Aries and cowboys in general. We've seen the Met Gala celebrating Black fashion. We have a Pope who may or may not be Black. We have a plantation that just burned down. Like, it is loud. The signposts are everywhere. So I think you can also learn about it through culture and through the people who have these powerful Neptune placements. Because another part of my research, which is a little bit more unfinished, is like really powerful Black people have had really powerful Neptune in their chart as well, right? So James Baldwin, Neptune Sun conjunction, Beyonce, Neptune is the highest planet in her chart. Same with Barack Obama, right? So I think even just being part of the culture, knowing about the culture is to know Neptune, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised if people are very intimately familiar with Neptune the more that they learn about it and just put a language to it. But yeah, we've all been through these experiences. I think it's a collective thing.
That's amazing. Amazing. I'm so serious.
I'm
I'm
glad.
so serious. I was like, anybody listening to this, please throw Camille some money.
Aw,
Throw her some money.
please.
Somebody, quick.
Because Neptune doesn't do profits. Neptune is anti-capitalist. Neptune doesn't care
Oh,
about resources, right?
oh,
But I do. We live in a
oh.
resourced world.
I'm
But
like,
no, but the
please.
robbing of profits is also a very Neptunian thing. Black people haven't been compensated at all for the fact we built America, along with a lot of other marginalized groups who haven't been recognized. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, no, that's real. I want as much support can come to you as possible for
yeah,
you to
thank
do
you.
your astrology practice, because I know you said you were thinking about doing it full time.
Yeah.
Um, Please, anybody out there, I have a few more questions, so we're winding down. This has been such a gift to me, and I hope other people
Thank
enjoy this
you.
episode. So, with all of your research, has there been anything that's been, surprising to you? Something that's just like, wow, I didn't see that coming, or like, I want to think about this more.
Yeah, so when I created the initial framework of this Neptune connection, I kind of like bucketed it up into like kind of major things, right? Culture, slavery, disparate impact, and all of that stuff. But as I kept giving this talk, and as people like you kept responding to it, I kept finding you know, at
Oh
a
no.
section. I think that it was
Oh,
in that
sorry.
presentation about
Could you
passing.
could you
Oh,
say
sorry.
that again? You went out.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so I was saying like the most surprising part of this research is just how it keeps showing up. And so I keep finding that I have to add more slides to the presentation. So one of the newer was I added the concept of passing, which is when people who look phenotypically white but are genetically black can just walk between worlds and be white and also be black. But also the more they choose to be white, the more that they are divorced from their black culture. So I brought that up. So what does it mean for people 1800 themselves, right? So there was a whole thing around like, we're going to document our experience of life by taking selfies or by getting portraits taken. That's Neptune. Neptune is film and all of that kind of like, high idealized, glamorized art. So now I'm going to add a section about that, right? And so, again, the most surprising part has just been how it's shown up in these big ways, but also in these very nuanced ways. And I feel like it's my ancestors because part of this research, I thought I was like, there's no way I'm just like lying. Like, is this real? Is this like real research? Is it real information? But it keeps showing up. And so I think that it's evidence that it is real. And so that's the most surprising part is that it has kept on going. First, I was just going to make it an Instagram post. Then I was like, no, I'll just turn it into a magazine. Then I was like, no, I have to do a whole talk about it. And now I'm doing a whole lecture about it, like at some point in the future. So it's just the gift that keeps on giving. And I think that's been the most surprising part.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so glad you kept following the thread and kept going. Um, and how do you okay, so you plan on continuing to do your research? Because I was gonna ask, how do you plan on continuing this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give another talk about it at the United Astrology Conference, which is one of the bigger ones that attracts astrologers from all over the world. And it's in Chicago. Maybe you'll come and be in the area. But I also have just realized because people are like, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? This might be the book. This might be the book. But that is going to be a very long, strenuous process because I want to do it right.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking maybe it can even become a novel, maybe something that'll be on Oprah's book club, fellow Aquarius.
Yes. Hey, I would read it. I sure
Yeah.
would. Um, finally, how can people connect with you?
Yeah. So CamilleMichelleGray.com. Maybe that'll be written out somewhere in the show notes, but you can find some of my writing there. All of the reframing that I talked about here today are articles on that website. And you can reach out for a reading. I have multiple offerings there. And you can follow me on Instagram, which is at Millie Michelle, MILLYMICHELLE. And that's where I post a lot of astrology infographics, and you'll be seeing a lot more content about Neptune in Aries and Saturn in Aries, right? And what it means for all of us, but also what it means for Black culture.
Wow, yeah, I really look forward to following your work and getting reading in the near future. Do you have any last thoughts on your heart?
Oh my God. Well, thank you for having me on this podcast. I think it's really important when Black voices like ours can come together. I don't know, there's something really magical about that. Yeah, so I would just say profound gratitude to you and everyone like you who has affirmed this work. It's not doing something for me. I think it's doing something for the culture to just, I don't know, see us in a different light. And so in that way, it's not about me. So I'm really happy to be able to pull people into these conversations and to have them think about it because it's your culture too. It's their culture too. So I want them to have this access to it. So that's mostly what's on my mind is gratitude and I just feel my ancestors with me.
I love that. Thank you so much for meeting me at Throughline, Camille. This has
Mm.
been, I'm so grateful. I really am. I feel, I feel grounded
Mm.
in, what you shared. And I just want to give you encouragement. I know life has its
Yeah.
ups and downs, just giving you encouragement. And I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you, Simone. Likewise. Likewise. Thank you.